I recently came across a house listed for sale that the city literally plans to drive a highway straight through the property, and it was still listed like nothing was wrong. We'll get to that story in a little bit here, but I'm gonna start with something a lot more common that could still cost you thousands of dollars if you're not careful. The first big mistake would be homes with structural issues, and we've all been trained at this point to avoid anything with the word structural on it. But let's actually define what a major structural issue is. If you see cracks in the foundation or throughout the house that are larger than a 1/4 inch gap, then you've got major settling going on that can be very costly. If you look at the floors and there's sagging, dips, or it's sloping to where you could drop a marble and it would roll, then you've got major foundation issues going on. We're also looking up at the roof to look for dips there as well. That could also be another indication of problems. The good news is if a seller knows of foundation issues or has performed foundation work, it is legally supposed to be disclosed when the home is listed for sale. The bad news is whether they've taken care of the problem or you have to, when you go to sell the house in the future, you also have to disclose any work done. And even if the seller has taken care of the foundation issues, if it was a really big project or they hired out the cheapest company that could come and do a little patch job, then you might still be on the hook for costly repairs, because sometimes foundation issues, they come back. Now, I've had clients buy homes with structural issues, and not all structural issues are created equal, but you should exercise an extreme level of caution. The second type of mistake that you should avoid is buying a home in a high-risk zone. This could mean fires, this could mean all sorts of things, but mainly we're talking about flood zones here in the triangle because we have lakes, rivers, and streams all throughout. The good news is that Wake County has made it extremely easy to know if a home you're looking at is in a flood zone. There's a simple map that you can go to. I'll put the link in the description, and it'll show you visually if that specific property is in a flood zone or not. Now, if a flood zone happens to be touching, say, the backyard, but it's not touching the house, you're most likely not required to get flood insurance, which is a good thing, but the seller is still legally required to disclose that the property is touching a flood zone, and that definitely has an impact on your ability to sell that home in the future. And of course, there's also a risk that that flood zone changes over time and gets closer to the property. And if it is already touching any corner of the house, not only are you required to get flood insurance and are susceptible to future problems, but it's gonna make it even harder to sell it in the future. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Benjamin. Before we get to the next costly mistake that you're definitely going to want to avoid, I would love the opportunity to meet you and help you navigate through all these common mistakes that we see a lot of our clients making. So if you're thinking about buying a home this year or next, just reach out at the contact information below or click that link in the description, set up a time to chat with me and my team. Okay, the third mistake that I see a lot of people make is buying in a flight path. Now, there are some people who say, hey, I'm okay with planes flying above my house. I grew up with planes flying above my house and I need to be really close to the airport. And so I would never stop someone from buying in a flight path, but people every day buy without even realizing it. And they also don't understand how it impacts their ability to sell in the future. The good news is, once again, Raleigh has made it extremely easy to tell if a home is in a flight path, because sellers also have to, yet again, legally disclose if they are in an official flight path where a certain amount of noise is made from overhead carriers. All you have to do is pull up the provided map from the Raleigh-Durham International Airport. As you can see, if you live in Morrisville or Northwest Raleigh, you are almost certainly going to be in a flight path. If you want to be close to the airport and you want to avoid the air noise, the good news is places like Cary, North Raleigh, and even Briar Creek get you within minutes of the airport without all the noise, without having to disclose it when you go to sell. So make sure that you consider this if you're buying a home near the airport. Costly mistake number 4 is buying a home that backs up against a major road, an interstate, highway, or a railroad. These are all avenues of transportation that make a lot of noise. You have wind noise, you have honking, and of course you have whistles from the train as well. This is a major problem. Thankfully, we do have a lot of trees in Raleigh that provide a little bit of visual protection, so you're not staring at a highway or at a train, but you're still gonna hear a lot of that noise coming through the trees, and that is not only gonna be an annoyance for you, but you're also most likely going to experience significantly harder resistance when it comes to selling that home. If you haven't caught on by now, every single one of these issues, even if you're totally okay with it, is still gonna have a major impact on your ability to sell, and thus it's gonna have an impact on your wallet. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to help you protect. An easy way to figure this out before you ever even get attached to a property is to look at Google Maps or Apple Maps and look at the aerial view. You can also find something like this within Zillow or Redfin, and you can quickly see if it's backing up against one of these things. A good rule of thumb is to be at least 1 block away from a major road and 4 blocks away from a train. Mistake number 5, this one throws a lot of people for a loop, and it's buying a house where you don't actually own the land. Now, let me explain, because there's several ways that this can happen, and it blindsides people on a daily basis. One is major easements, and this essentially means that someone else has the right to part of your land. For example, a utility provider has access to a corner of your property because there's drainage that runs underneath the ground. Something goes wrong, they need to bust into there and fix it. Well, unfortunately, the previous owner built a fence on top of that easement. You had no idea, and now they're tearing down your fence and you have to pay for it. Property line boundaries. This is a very common issue that comes up where, let's say, a neighbor built their fence on part of your yard, or even worse, you have a fence on part of their yard. This previous seller did it and you had no idea. You close, a new buyer comes in and buys the house next to you, and then they make a fuss about it, and legally you have to tear down that fence and get it off their property. Riparian rights. This is just a fancy way of saying waterway rights. And in North Carolina, we like to protect our drainage and our waterways. So we have wetlands, we have streams and creeks, and that often means that there's a certain buffer where you can't do anything with your land. You can't touch it, you can't build on it, you can't put a fence on it. Maybe the seller's already done that. The city finds out and then you're on the hook for it. Best case scenario is you have a section of your property, land that you are paying for when you buy the house, that you can't even really use. And of course, that also starts to lead us back into the issue with flood zones that we already talked about. Mineral rights. This one blew me away when I was in real estate school. You would never think of this if you didn't know better. And it's that someone can actually detach the rights of the soil beneath the surface of your land. So you might be buying a house thinking you own everything, right? You own the airspace, you own the ground. No, you just own the top of the lot, and someone can actually come in from an adjacent lot and they can drill underneath your surface if they find oil or for a number of reasons, and that could seriously impact the usability of your land. It impacts the value of your land for sure. And there's all sorts of problems and chaos that can come out from that. And usually, if an owner has severed those rights, it's for a reason. Eminent domain. If you've never heard of this concept, I'm about to blow your mind, and this is actually the story that we started the video off with. The government has the legal right to seize your property and do whatever they wish with it if they can make a case for it. So we gave the example of a house that's actively listed for sale right now at the time of this video. They want about $550,000 for it. And the government, as we speak, is planning on paving a highway straight through the property, tearing down the house, and essentially bringing the value of that house and that land to zero, for which you will get zero compensation from the government. As you can imagine, the seller is in a horrible position they probably never saw coming, and they're trying to jump ship before it sinks, but unfortunately, no buyer in the right mind would be willing to pick that up unless they didn't watch this video. Problem number 6. If you live in Ohio, this is not something you have to worry about, but here in Raleigh, we have a lot of dense, mature, very tall trees. I'm talking 60-foot pines that are backing up to your property, and sometimes they're even hanging over the house a little bit. If you see a house that has a yard just full of trees and it's so beautiful, you also have to think about the negative side of that, which is there is a serious risk of those trees falling. Because guess what? Here in North Carolina, we get hailstorms, we get the outer impacts of hurricanes coming in from the East Coast. It can happen, and it does happen. And so when I'm looking at a house with trees, of course, knowing that you can't avoid them because they're everywhere here, I am looking at how far the trees are from the house, because sometimes they're just at the back of the lot and there is still a risk of them touching the house because of how tall they are. So when I'm looking at a house, I do usually recommend, if the trees are getting pretty close to the property, that we have them looked at to see if they're at risk for fall damage, to see if they need trimmed back at the very least so they don't cause damage to the roof if a branch falls. We're even looking to make sure the roots aren't causing issues with the foundation, which is something that I run into quite commonly. And sometimes we even ask the sellers for a credit to pay for the removal of certain trees if they are causing issues. Mistake number 7, you're definitely gonna wanna avoid this one, and that is cheap flips or DIYs. And so we see this very commonly. Let's say a seller is wanting to improve the value of their home, but they're not willing to pay a contractor to do it right. And so over the course of the 7 years that they own the house, they're doing the painting themselves. And you can see where they actually painted a little bit of the ceiling too. You know, they're replacing the trim, and we can see the nails sticking out of the trim because they didn't bother to do it right. They installed soft close on the cabinets, and now the cabinet doors don't actually shut fully. And the worst thing is they think their house is worth $50,000 more than it was before because of all the upgrades they did, when you and I know it's actually worth even less than when they started, because we have to go and undo all their work and actually do it right. And these big flippers like your Open Door and your Mark Spain, they don't tend to be that much better, to be honest. They often come in and do a super rush job, really just making it look nice enough so that they can snap some photos and get people interested. But when you walk inside the property, almost every time you're gonna notice things like foundation issues that went unkept. You're gonna notice that the backyard is in really rough shape, or the roof and the HVAC are still super old, big costs that you're gonna have when you buy the house. Or they covered up smoke smell with paint, hoping that that would just do the trick. I would be very weary overpaying for a house that someone has done work on. It just goes to show that pictures are not everything, and just because they say it's updated does not mean you need to overpay. And that leads me into mistake number 8, and that is unpermitted work. That DIY seller that did everything themselves, well, they also built an entire deck, they also added an entire sunroom, and guess what? They didn't pull the permits for it, so you have no real idea of knowing if it's to code, if it was done well, how long it's gonna last, and also, by the way, if the city were to find out, you would have to be on the hook for going through the costly and time-consuming process of getting it permitted. Now, I have clients that buy houses with unpermitted work, and the only thing that you need to be aware of, if that's you and it's your dream house, that when you do eventually go to sell, and everyone eventually does, that you're also going to have to disclose that unpermitted work to the next buyer. Even if the work was actually done very well, maybe they had a contractor do it and they just didn't bother to pull permits, it still could cause issues for you later on, but it's not near as costly as mistake number 9, which is buying a house that actually has title issues. And this is exactly why we do title searches and have title insurance here in North Carolina. Essentially, someone could have a past claim on your house. That could be a contractor that was unpaid. It could be someone who had partial ownership in the house and it wasn't disclosed. Say a married couple gets divorced, and one side decides to sell the house without permission from the other. And you only find this out later on when they say, hey, I still own that property. There have been cases where people have bought houses only to later find out that it was part of a foreclosure or a short sale, or there was an active lawsuit going on where that house was used for collateral. Others have discovered that the house they bought had actually been zoned for a different type of property. Say you bought a duplex and it was built illegally on a single family zoned lot, meaning that that was never supposed to happen, and the city could absolutely come after you and ask you to tear down the entire property at your cost. And that is why title work is so important, and why we also purchase a survey so that we can identify all these issues well before you close on your home. And that leads me to mistake number 10. You should definitely avoid making this when looking for a home in Raleigh, and that is buying a home where the values of that neighborhood or of that house are actually trending downward. Now, issues 1 through 9 that we've already discussed, they all have serious implications that could cause the value of your home to go downward. I'm talking about zooming out and actually looking at the street or the neighborhood and seeing what's happening with the values of the homes at large. Now, historical appreciation, whether that's good, meaning the property values are going up, or bad, they're going down, that's not an exact indicator of whether it's gonna continue in that direction. We see neighborhoods all the time that look like they're doing poorly, they're heading in the wrong direction, and then something changes and they start to really take off and people start moving there. And then sometimes we see neighborhoods that are once really hot and desirable and they take a turn for the worse. But in general, we can use the past and kind of look at the trajectory of where house values are going to see if there's going to be a positive or negative change in the future. When you're looking at houses, it's really easy to get consumed by, am I gonna like living there? Does it check my boxes? How will my kids feel? But you also really need to think about, what's it going to be worth in the future? Is it gonna be easy to sell? And that's kind of the main point of this video. Again, I told you my job here mainly is to protect your wallet and your investment, because when you're buying a home to live in, it is still 100% an investment. And that's exactly why I spend so much time looking at these things with my clients, so that we actually know we're making the right decision and not just buying a house because it's pretty. Again, if you're thinking about buying a home this year or next, I invite you to reach out at the contact information below. I look forward to meeting you. In the meantime, keep watching more of these videos to learn about living in Raleigh and its many great suburbs.